Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely wild. We are breaking down a highly viral, explosive, and, quite frankly, totally chaotic piece of source material that has been absolutely dominating conversations about the Los Angeles local elections. We're looking at a recent breakdown that analyzes a fiery message from Spencer Pratt. Now, you might recognize that name from reality TV, but he recently made a run in local LA politics. We are going to strictly and impartially analyze the claims, the intense rhetoric, and the broader historical arguments presented in this source video to understand exactly why this whole thing went so incredibly viral. Let's map out the exact narrative they've constructed. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap to dissect these claims. First, we'll look at the viral concession video itself, then we'll cover the unverified threats and FBI raid claims, unpack the allegations of fraud on Skid Row, examine the broader historical argument they make, and finally, talk about the wait for these mysterious secret tapes. Section 1, a viral concession video. You know, usually when a political campaign comes to an end, we expect a somewhat somber, respectful speech congratulating the opponent, right? Well, Pratt sets a totally different tone. He releases what he calls Phase 3 of his mission to save Los Angeles, and it is a highly charged, super aggressive rant directed squarely at the establishment candidates, specifically Karen Bass and Nithya Raman. Right out of the gate, he declares he'd like to apologize to absolutely nobody. He tells his audience he didn't run for political power, but to expose a corrupt machine, making it crystal clear that losing the election hasn't silenced him. It's basically just removed his leash. And man, did this unapologetic vibe hit a nerve. The source video points out a staggering 5.3 million views, and that was achieved in under 24 hours. So why does this matter to us? Because it illustrates perfectly how a hyperlocal political grievance can be weaponized into a massive, viral internet spectacle almost overnight. It captured the attention of millions of people who are just instantly hooked by this unfiltered, raw anger. So, what's actually fueling all this anger? Well, he paints a highly vivid, apocalyptic picture of Los Angeles under the leadership of Karen Bass and Nithya Raman, who he repeatedly labels as corrupt communists. He cites businesses literally packing up and fleeing the city, rampant potholes, graffiti everywhere, and streets filled with garbage, drugs, and feces. He even throws in mentions of burned-down towns and abandoned storefronts. The source uses these intense, gritty visual descriptors to frame his motivation. Basically, he believes the city is quite literally tumbling into an abyss, and he blames the current leadership for the whole shebang. Moving on to Section 2, tapes, threats, and FBI raids. Now, what's really interesting about this is where things take a massive left turn. Pratt pivots entirely away from standard local complaints about potholes and trash and escalates directly into making highly intense, unverified threats against his political opponents. He claims to possess secret audio recordings of a major candidate doing and saying something so undeniably damning that it would force them to resign in total shame. The source video really heavily emphasizes that Pratt claims he was intentionally hoarding this October surprise-style evidence specifically for the general election. He literally dares the city to certify the election, promising to drop the tape the second they do. But he doesn't just casually mention a tape. He describes the fallout in granular, intense detail. We're talking impending 5 a.m. FBI raids, doors and offices being physically broken open by agents, and forced resignations. He directly addresses his opponents, stating he wants them lying awake at night, sweating and worried. The source uses these exact, explosive scenarios to build a compelling, highly dramatic narrative that just totally hooks the viewer in. Which brings us to Section 3, allegations of Skid Row fraud. All right, at this point, the host analyzing Pratt's video shifts gears from the rant itself over to specific local allegations. They outline a precise timeline to cast doubt on the mail-in ballot results. According to their narrative, here's how it went down. Step 1, Spencer Pratt looked like he was leading on Election Day. Step 2, 5 days passed where late mail-in ballots were continuously counted. In Step 3, the opponent, Nithya Raman, suddenly came up with just enough ballots to overtake Pratt. The source presents this timeline not just as standard vote counting, but as a deeply suspicious flip, suggesting that the extended counting period was used to basically manufacture a victory. And this brilliantly illustrates the exact tactic the source uses to validate their suspicion. They present a stark contrast. On the left, we see the mainstream media headline from the LA Times, stating flat out that voter fraud claims are unfounded. But on the right, the source claims that if you actually dig into the contents of that very same article, it documents homeless individuals on Skid Row being paid cash to register to vote. The host uses this contradiction to argue that the mainstream media is essentially burying the truth inside their own reporting. To really ground this claim in reality, the source zeroes in on a very specific number from the reporting: $10. The video alleges that homeless individuals on Skid Row were approached and accepted a couple of dollars, amounting to roughly a tangible $10 payout to provide multiple fraudulent signatures using various names. By focusing on this exact financial transaction, the source is trying to turn a vague, abstract accusation of voter fraud into a concrete, verifiable event happening right there on the streets of Los Angeles. All right, Section 4, the historical fraud argument. The source video then brings in political commentator Michael Knowles to pull way back. He connects these localized LA issues, the $10 payouts on Skid Row, the lake ballot drops, to a much broader, overarching historical narrative. The core thesis here is boldly stated. Modern election anomalies are not just isolated incidents. They're actually part of a 200-year playbook of democratic election theft. The source asserts that what Spencer Pratt allegedly experienced is simply the modern application of institutionalized tactics dating all the way back to 1828. They actually map out a meticulous, chronological timeline to prove this so-called playbook exists. They start back in 1868 with Tammany Hall in New York. Then they jump to Lyndon B. Johnson's 1948 Senate run in Texas. After that, John F. Kennedy's 1960 presidential win in Illinois, a 1994 state Senate race in Pennsylvania, and finally, a 2003 mayor's race in East Chicago. By stacking these specific historical events side by side like a giant puzzle, the source attempts to establish a structured, long-standing pattern of behavior. And to back up that timeline, the video throws in some highly specific data points. They cite an 1868 audit claiming 16% of all New York City votes were fraudulent. They point to exactly 202 late votes that were mysteriously dropped in Box 13 to give LBJ an 87-vote victory in Texas. And they highlight 1982 in Chicago, claiming a grand jury found 100,000 fraudulent votes that resulted in 62 indictments. Now, whether you agree with their framing or not, it's clear the source uses these specific metrics to give their historical argument a real air of factual authority. A massive piece of this historical puzzle, according to the source, is a mechanism called ballot harvesting. They define this as the gathering and submitting of absentee or mail-in ballots by third-party individuals. The source argues this practice has historically been used to essentially import fake votes without any secure chain of custody. They draw a direct line from this concept to the 2020 election laws, arguing that the expansion of absentee voting and unsecured drop boxes in places like Los Angeles is really just the latest, modernized version of this 200-year-old trick. Finally, Section 5, waiting on the tapes. So the crucial point is, after taking us on this grand tour of 200 years of American political history, the explainer drops us right back into the immediate, viral controversy that started this whole thing. We are left with this stark reminder from Pratt. He claims to have audio of a candidate doing and saying something that would make her resign in shame. The source video leaves this quote just hanging in the air. Because, let's be real, despite all the deep historical analysis, the ultimate hook that generated those 5.3 million views is the promise of hidden, undeniable proof of corruption that's just waiting to be unleashed. Which leaves us with one massive, unresolved cliffhanger. Who is allegedly on this secret audio tape? Is it Karen Bass? Is it Nuthia Rahman? And honestly, more importantly, does this tape actually exist? And will it ever surface to trigger those 5 a.m. FBI raids and forced resignations Pratt promised? The source video leaves us waiting, brilliantly turning a local election grievance into an ongoing high-stakes political thriller. Thanks for joining me for this breakdown. Keep asking questions, always look at how these arguments are structured, and stay curious. Catch you next time.